Hello, and a very warm welcome to our 11th Democracy Talk. Um, my name is Diana Trevino. I'm Project Officer at the European University Continuing Education Network. And you can all turn on your cameras now if you want. And today we invited Benjamin Mallon to present about citizens' assemblies for children and young people and the implications for education for democracy. So Benjamin, I'm very happy that you joined us today. And yes, we will first see your presentation, and then afterwards we will have a short conversation with you and address the questions we might have. So I think it's a really nice topic that you will present to us today. So feel free to share your screen, Ben, and if you want, you can present yourself additionally, and yeah.
That's great. Thanks so much, Dana. So it's lovely to have this opportunity to present. So hopefully you can all see the screen there.
Yeah.
And so the piece of work that I'll be talking about is a collaboration led by my colleague in Dublin City University, Dermot Tawney, along with colleagues in DCU, Valerie Millay, and colleagues in University College Cork, Katie Reid and Clodagh Harris, which has looked at children's participation in citizens' assemblies. And I'll talk quite briefly about what those assemblies are and the piece of research that's gone alongside, and I'll finish with some reflections on what that might mean for education for democracy. So I'll begin just by showing just 2 minutes of a short video developed as part of a children's and young persons assembly that took part in Ireland in 2022, concerned with biodiversity loss. So I'll show you 2 minutes of the video, and the longer version is available online for you to have a look at.
In September 2022, 35 children and young people, aged 7 to 17 from across Ireland, were randomly selected to be members of Ireland's first Children and Young People's Assembly on Biodiversity Loss. We are some of the children and young people who were chosen, and we're excited to tell you about what happened next. We spent 2 weekends together, one in beautiful County Wicklow and our second weekend in Killarney National Park in County Kerry. We spent our first weekend learning about biodiversity and the causes of biodiversity loss. We had a lot of fun playing games, getting creative, and spending time outside, exploring a local nature reserve, which we really loved. We spent our second weekend working together to come up with our vision for the future and our calls to action, which we are excited to share with you.
Our Assembly's vision is an Ireland where we are connected to and care for the rights of nature and each other, so that biodiversity is restored and protected, and we live and grow up in healthy, clean, and fair environments.
We also created 6 key messages that we want everyone to know.
We must treat the earth like a member of the family or a close friend.
Future generations must live in a world where there isn't a biodiversity crisis and where children don't have to take action because of the inaction of past generations.
Every decision must take biodiversity into account.
Children and young people must be included in decisions being made about biodiversity.
Biodiversity protection must be a shared responsibility and a global collaborative effort.
We must consume resources in a sustainable, moderate way that neither diminishes the environment, biodiversity, or our rights, well-being.
Okay, so like I said, the full version of the video and the website I can share through the sort of democratic communications. But in short, the the piece of research that runs alongside the assembly is to explore the extent to which children and youth assemblies can support participation in deliberative democracy and also inclusion within wider democratic processes. We're also interested in the role that education can play in terms of empowering and informing and empowering children and supporting their engagement with biodiversity loss. And the third part of it is around human rights frameworks supporting transformation towards a healthy and just environment for children. So we undertook focus groups with two groups of children at the end of the assembly. And then we met again with them a year later, conducted 3 focus groups with all of the children involved in the assembly and focus groups with their parents and carers to find out more about their experiences of being involved within the assembly and their perspectives on sort of some of these wider democratic questions. So the presentation today is part of a paper which is currently under review in a journal, and it's framed around the European Green Deal. So we were interested in how are children and this idea of citizenship conceptualized within the European Green Deal. So we recognise that there is this sort of space for citizen participation in the European Green Deal. And that runs alongside this idea of this child-friendly culture in relation to EU policy making. There are some questions around sort of the responsibilities of sort of individuals and groups within the European Green Deal, which does raise questions of where children might fit in. There is a small but increasing body of research which looks at the relationship between education and the European Green Deal. And then in terms of children's assemblies themselves, so in the context of the European Green Deal, they're part of a climate pact. So there is this argument or this suggestion that the EGD will build on this ongoing series of citizen dialogues and citizens' assemblies which are taking place across the EU. So the Children's Assembly ran alongside an adult assembly that was taking place at the same time, and there have been a number of adult assemblies in Ireland in previous years. And the idea of citizens and youth assemblies is a relatively new idea. These citizens' assemblies, in their broadest form, are seen as deliberative mini-publics and are seen as a central pillar of the European Green Deal. They're recognised as being a space for vulnerable groups to engage with policies, but children are traditionally excluded. And we know from research elsewhere, children are traditionally excluded from lots of democratic spaces. So these assemblies, one took place in Scotland, the Children's Climate Assembly, I think 4 years ago now, and there have been a couple of examples globally. So from the findings, from the analysis of the work that we did, we found sort of 2 of the key things that I think are important in the context of this discussion are around the inclusion of children within decision-making processes. So just got a couple of quotes from some of the children and young people that describe how they feel about this idea. So one of the participants said, adults just don't want to listen to someone that's younger than them. And they think that they're more superior because they're on the earth longer, and added and kind of destroyed it while they were there. So this recognition that often participation and children's voice is shut down in certain spaces. From one of the other focus groups, we're not really listened to, but here within the context of the assembly, we were. Here we were given our opinions, and here we were given a space to actually voice what we think and what we want to see happen. If children and young people aren't going to be part of their own future, how can we possibly solve this? So there were these ideas of intergenerational justice, the importance of children's voices in relation to the significant and complex sort of threat of biodiversity loss. And I suppose from the research, what we're arguing is that such assemblies present a really important opportunity for involvement, which Laura Lundy has identified as really significant in terms of supporting Article 12 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, children's right to participate, children to give their express opinions in terms of matters.
Just a comment. The person who has turned on the camera. Yeah, okay. You can continue.
So this sort of second of the themes that important in terms of the context of this paper is around this deliberative process and the purpose of this deliberative process leading to informed collective decision making. So recognizing the assembly and the deliberations that went on as part of that framework, recognizing the education component of it to support children's understanding of complex issues, recognizing that the decision making wasn't as individual, but was based on sort of collective understanding and collective ideas for action. So a couple of the quotes from one of the focus groups. Before we want to share our opinion, it's really important to learn as much as we can and get educated. And this assembly was, I think, really well able to start this process in a really positive way. So also this recognition that this assembly was the start of the process. And I'll talk to you shortly about some of the things that sort of kicked on from this process. From one of the other focus groups in the assembly, so this was actually the focus group with younger children. So the age, I can't remember whether it was mentioned in the video there, but was between 7 to 17 years of age. So this was the younger group in the assembly. They take things that would like usually be boring, like to learn about and make it really fun to learn about and make like it's easy to make new friends in it, and they just make it really fun to learn. So this idea around the importance of this I suppose active participatory educational process underpinning that. And one thing that we felt was very, really strong was this connection between learning and that being really fundamental to this informed collective decision making. So this final thing I was going to talk about really was then some of the actions that children had talked about. And this was post the assembly. So they talked about these actions. We felt like these were sort of different spheres of influence. And Laura Lundy, when she writes about sort of Article 12 and participation, talks about the importance of providing space for children to express opinion, to support and scaffold their voice, to provide an audience for those children and young people, and also to support the influence for these views to be taken on board. And we felt like there were sort of 4 key spheres of influence. So in terms of the European Green Deal, Mashin and Tan talk about these sort of critical acts of citizenship, of critical acts of environmental citizenship. And we felt like these explanations from the children describe these critical acts of citizenship. And Larkins talks about, you know, children maybe transgressing the boundaries through their actions. So I suppose at the most local level, children talked about actions within their families and within their immediate friendship groups. So one of the younger members of the assembly talking about going outside the house and put up a sign, "Save our planet." So I kind of protested a bit. Within schools, and there was some really important connections to schools as places where biodiversity learning had happened, but also where action and citizenship action could happen. So one of the members said, "I was really lucky to be able to speak in front of my school and my peers." This is after the assembly, and spread the knowledge that was given here to educate more people on the work that we did and the whole process of the assembly. Others took this citizenship action further into the community. So I kind of went to the leader of the Tidy Towns. So Tidy Towns is an organisation that would do sort of litter picking and would be responsible for keeping particular local areas tidy across Ireland. So this young person described going to the Tidy Towns and talking to them about the use of weed killer and describing the negative health impacts of this weed killer, how it can actually damage someone's lungs, and also it's not just for biodiversity, it's also for us. And then some of the older members talked about some of their sort of broader European and potentially sort of global spheres that they were thinking about and operating in. So they talking about engaging with biodiversity loss. This needs to be a global movement. It can't happen in one country. For global change to happen, this needs to be everywhere. This needs to be every child's rights upheld, not just that in Ireland. It's great that it's here, but it needs to be everywhere, because there are some regions that are much more affected by biodiversity loss than ours. So, but finally, I suppose I was just thinking about sort of reflecting on that paper, on the research that we've undertaken, and in part on my sort of involvement within that Children and Young Persons Assembly on biodiversity loss, and thinking about what potentially some of the implications for education for democracy and potentially the Democrat project might be. So in terms of within the Democrat project, we have this framework for responsible democratic competencies. So thinking about each of those in turn. So starting with the idea about solidarity and participation and deliberation. I think the Assembly provides maybe an important opportunity to make connections to some of the broader democratic processes that are happening, and potentially some of these broader European democratic processes. There's also opportunities to think about what modelling of such an assembly might mean in a school context or in a broader school system. It raises questions around inclusive deliberative models, based on the randomised sample of children that were involved. There's opportunities to engage with children's multi-level citizenship actions, thinking about how they take actions within their homes, within their schools, within their wider communities, and then at national and regional level. And maybe opportunities also to critique how citizenship and children's participation is conceptualized in broader education policy. And then finally, just in terms of that ideas of judgment and resilience underpinning this competence framework for democracy, and thinking about the opportunities for developing informed collective decision making in matters that are significantly affecting children and young people's lives, and thinking about in terms of resilience the huge challenge we face in terms of addressing biodiversity loss and recognizing the importance of having education for democracy as part of the response to biodiversity and the climate crisis. So I just have there's a series of different references there that were useful in terms of framing the paper and some of the stuff which I've talked about there. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Ben, for the presentation and for this very, very interesting project you presented. I have some things I would like to address, but I also invite all of us here in Zoom, but also in the YouTube channel to contribute any comment, questions you might have, and we will discuss this here. But I would like to start, Ben, and my first question, maybe it sounds a little bit basic, but I would like to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think? Why is it important to include children in assemblies from a perspective from the individual side, but also on a more societal perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Tana. I mean, is their right to participate and have their views on things that affect them taken into consideration? I mean, there are lots of examples of when children's voice has been ignored or shut down, and the significant issues that have come with those silences. I think that at a broader level, with discussions around biodiversity loss, climate change, and other global challenges, recognise the sort of intergenerational injustice within these issues. So the fact is that children sort of born today are going to face the worst of these situations, having contributed least to the creation of the issues, and the same for future generations. Now, in some places there are increased attempts to engage with, what future generations might face, but young people younger children are in a similar situation and will be faced with those things. So I think it's of utmost urgency that that perspective is considered. And then to go back to the rights, they have a right to be part of that discussion about how we address this, and in a way, ignoring their perspectives has sort of led us to this the point that we're in now. So there would be sort of two key things, I think, Dana.
I totally agree. I was also thinking about maybe possible challenges that would arise when you implement this type of school-based assemblies, but also on a broader level, because you also mentioned this in one of the quotes of the children, that adults or older persons or decision-making persons don't take really serious what young people or children have to say. And first of all, did you experience something of this happening? And the second question is, how can we affront this, that we face this, because I think it's a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that there are lots of or you would hear lots of arguments around why children shouldn't be included within decision-making processes, which may be sort of lack of understanding, immaturity, the sort of emotional difficulty of dealing with discomforting information. I think that without sort of going into those in too much depth, I don't think they stand up to much in terms of criticism, because we have this question about whether adults understand biodiversity loss and are therefore informed enough to make a decision around it. We have the fact that children are not oblivious to the fact that biodiversity loss and climate change are happening anyway. It's part of their lives. We know from research that there's implications for them already in terms of their health, in terms of their well-being. And it's not so much that I was aware of it, but the children spoke about not being listened to and were very aware of that. I mean, I suppose the assembly is just one small space where adults through funding have supported children to have this space. So there's a delicate balance between supporting children within those spaces and allowing them the supporting their agency to develop those spaces themselves, to find ways of having their voice heard, to develop their own actions. I know within Roger Hart, within his ladder, sort of at the top of the ladder of participation, has this idea, if I'm thinking about it right, around this sort of adults and children young people working alongside each other. I know there's sometimes criticism that maybe it should be children and young people working alone, but I think that the size of the issue and the significance of the issue requires a collective response. And often adults are in positions of power where they do have space and opportunities to extend children's influence and support that voice, but I suppose it's a delicate balance.
Yeah. Thank you. And we have one question from Alba, so please feel free. Oh, Alba, it's Carsten today.
Yeah, surprise. So I only want to ask you if this is a sporadic event, or if in Ireland you have also youth councils as a regular mechanism in cities.
So that there are more, sort of formal structures around, like a Dublin Oaks and Corlin and Oaks, so these children's parliaments and then bodies associated with that. The extent to which they're sort of formally connected to the education system, that probably is not so clear. This particular assembly wasn't connected formally to one of those mechanisms, so it was a broader open call for participation, and then a randomized stratified sample of children were selected to be involved in the assembly, which follows the the process by which adults' assemblies work. So in an Irish context, if I get it right, I think 100 adults were randomly selected to be involved in the adults' assembly. So I suppose maybe some of the implications, I think, in terms of schooling might be, around things like student councils or representative bodies within schools. How are they developed and structured? Who gets to be included, and what are the mechanisms for that? So it's outside of that structure. And then I suppose going forward, that there's lots of potential that such assemblies could run alongside adult assemblies. There's potentially going to be an adult assembly around education. And for me, I think it would be really important that children and young people have a really clear space to contribute to that discussion, considering the centrality of education for their lives. Now, the extent to which it's connected to the adult assembly or something different or runs alongside, I'm not sure. It remains to be seen. Does that answer your question, Carsten? Oh, sorry, you're on mute there, I think, Carsten.
Only that as here in Catalonia, by law, all the cities needs to create a youth council. But none all cities have done it. I want only to see if there's a connection to this this type of mechanism. And if you have a similar mechanism in Ireland.
In terms of that sort of regional or city-based, not that I know of, although I am aware of the some of the things that the children from the assembly went to was engagement with local councils or city councils in their locations that they came from. So there were those connections which came sort of through the assembly, but less of a sort of formal structure involving children and young people. Although it's increasingly that this, particularly drawing on Laura Lundy's model, that of space, voice, audience, and influence, that's within Irish policy around sort of children and young people now. So there's a push for it. I know my colleague in geography education, Joe Usher, does some really interesting stuff around children's involvement in planning processes, which maybe is in sort of another connection to potentially sort of government processes and the involvement of children within those processes. It sounds very interesting, Carsten.
Yeah, there's also these UNICEF initiatives for children-friendly cities where they promote also youth councils in the cities. Only to mention this at the end.
Okay, Ben, we have another question in the chat from Vanina. She asks, first of all, she thanks a lot for your presentation, and she asks, how can youth assemblies address complex issues such as gender and racial discrimination, and how do these intersect with climate change and biodiversity loss, ensuring that marginalized communities are included in environmental justice efforts?
Okay, thanks, Vanina. I'm glad it was of use. It's a really, really good question. I mean, I suppose I talked about the sort of the intergenerational injustice, and part of, for me, around the justice piece is that there are groups of people which include children, but include people in lots of different spaces who must be included within decision-making processes. I think that in terms of the assembly, so one of that we had this randomized stratified sampling to try and give that broader sort of representative approach to the assembly, which was, I suppose, a challenge, recognizing also that I suppose people and particular groups of people have been shut down over a long period of time, so traditionally excluded from places. So the extent to which they're going to want to engage or even realize that they have the right to engage, whether it's be through school or other mechanisms, is very difficult. So I don't think one-off processes and necessarily good enough to address those challenges. So there has to be ways of connecting to communities, of recognizing where there are disparities and inequities in relation to these issues. And I suppose that's where I would see the importance of schools. I mean, at the most basic level, making sure that those places are inclusive, that children have access to schooling and are not excluded from schooling. And then when they're in those places, that those places give them space to engage, and that teachers are recognize historical injustices and are working to try and address them, and as part of a wider education system, which needs to address those things too. So I think that there's potential in terms of this type of approach, but recognizing that it's not enough in terms of addressing long-standing systemic issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Georges also has a question.
Thank you very much, Ben, for your presentation. And it's good to see that there are similar things happening also here in Greece. There is a project funded by the EU called Arsinoe, and with the University of Athens there, we work on having two young people's assemblies every 6 months almost, which is students of high school and then also university students who go around the area of Athens and look for things that can be done, need to be done for climate action. That's more specific. And then they put them together in a declaration or decision that they make, consulting among themselves, and they take the proposals to the municipal authorities or the regional authorities there. So I think it's similar, and I don't know if there it will last longer, but it is part of this 4-year, I think, project. So for a while it's happening, and it's good to hear that in Catalonia they're doing it in every school, something like that. But so is there such a prospect in Ireland, or you think it should be generalized in Europe? That's one thing. And the second is, when you say that, okay, the children have the right to be part of decision making, of course, but is there also always a process of teaching them? Because everybody wants to be part of decision making without researching first, we're learning first there without consulting with experts and all these things. If we encourage too early decision making instead of learning or thinking, we may encourage traits of human nature that are disconnect decisions with science and other things. So how do you deal with that, if you have thought about it in that project? Thank you.
Thanks, Georges. I mean, I would say that in relation to that, I think we're there in terms of the attitudes to science, and we saw from the COVID pandemic, and we see from some responses to climate change, there is that disconnect already. I think that's part of children's lived experiences. They're having to deal with misinformation, disinformation, all of those things. I think that there is an important role for education within it. I suppose that you have the challenge of that there's the sort of formal education side of it, and the role that formal education can play. And I suppose there's, even in terms of biodiversity loss, it's contentious, the types of actions that are proposed. We can see that across Europe in terms of some of the farming protests and other things that have gone on. So there is a need for education around it. But I suppose there's also a need for processes which are more democratic and participatory. So children, young people have the experience of working together to recognize that when we make a decision, we're not making it necessarily on what is going to benefit us most, but what we think would serve maybe the majority of people, or those people in most need, or address a situation that is really significant and important. So there's the process, and the educational part, it needs to be at the center of it. But I would say that that's the same for adults as well. And then you're going to move into the space where supporting through critical thinking to deal with how we deal with online sources, what information do we trust or do we not trust, how we deal with conspiracy theory and all the other stuff around how people learn about an issue. And then also maybe some of the deeper questions around what we value, what type of future would we like, whose voice is included in this process and who isn't, and who should we try and bring into this process. But for me, I mean, I'm biased because I believe strongly in the value of education, but I would say education at the centre of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I would like, I don't know, I think we don't have more questions, but I would like to come to my last thought about your presentation. And I think really, if we have global challenges and if we want to be that people, and especially children, that will face these realities in the future, if we want them to become aware, then the problem needs to be more reachable for children. And I think what you presented, the project, makes this possible. And as I understood, there's also a lot of learning involved about biodiversity in Ireland, yet in this concrete example. And so I think this is the best way in order to train or to educate children in a way that they realize what is happening and to foster action of them. So these are my last thoughts. Maybe you want to have a last comment, Ben, but I think, yeah, it was a great.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks to everyone for listening. I mean, I suppose maybe the final thought I had, and this maybe is connected to both Carsten and George's point as well a bit, is around, well, what happens when the government isn't listening? What happens when the government isn't doing? And I think that some of the stuff around justice does consider, legal approaches which children are taking, to hold governments to account when their end of the bargain isn't being upheld. So I think that's part of the process as well. It's wonderful to have these calls to action, but I think then there's a collective responsibility to ensure that these things are done. That goes much wider than that group of children and young people.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, and then there's now a last question which is totally related to your comment. The question is, how could such assemblies be scaled up? And but I don't know if you can answer this now.
Money. I think that this was funded by a government department, and it was supported by a lot of committed people and committed children and young people and the people who support them, their families. So that I think there's possibilities in terms of within an Irish context, there's increasing sort of student councils and school-based engagement with these type of things, green committees, those type of spaces. So I think it might be more of a case of looking at where there's really opportunities for connection between these assemblies and what's already happening at a grassroots level, and bringing together very teachers who are very committed, schools who are very committed, and young people who care deeply about this issue. So I think in different contexts it would look very different, but I think that there's sort of lots of hope in terms of what it is out there and already going on.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ben, for your presentation, for your thoughts, and now in our dialogue in the end. I hope that you also will join our next Democracy Talk on the 13th of October, and we will then have the chance to listen to Valeria Damiani of the LUMSA University of Rome, and she will speak about the topic, the school as a democratic learning environment, on an example in Italy. So I think it will be also very interesting. But first of all, thanks a lot to all of you for joining, especially to you, Ben, for presenting, and I hope to see you soon on the 30th of October again.
Thank you.